It started on one of those blistering summer afternoons where the sun seems determined to melt every ounce of shade in the neighborhood. My backyard pool, something I had saved for, worked for, and maintained myself, was my sanctuary. But then came the letter from the HOA. A bold-printed notice slid into my mailbox, claiming that I was unauthorized to use my own pool without paying a new set of fees. They called it community compliance charges, as if slapping a fancy title on it made the robbery sound legitimate. I stood there, sweating in the heat, holding that ridiculous paper, realizing just how far they were willing to go to squeeze control out of me. The more I read it, the more absurd it became. They wanted me to pay monthly fees just to swim in the water I paid to fill, to clean, to maintain, as if my pool was somehow theirs. I was furious, but then I laughed, because in their greed, they made a mistake. If they wanted to act like my pool was a community resource, well, maybe I should treat it like one. And that's when the idea struck me. If they're going to try and charge me for my own pool, then fine. I'll open it up to everyone, free of charge. Let them see what happens when the whole neighborhood is invited to a party the HOA never approved. I wasted no time. I printed flyers, I sent out texts, I knocked on doors. Pool party this Saturday, everyone's welcome. Bring your kids, bring snacks, bring floaties. I could see the sparkle in people's eyes as I spread the word. Families that had grown tired of the HOA's constant nitpicking suddenly had something to look forward to. Word spread like wildfire, and by Friday night, I had neighbors offering to bring grills, speakers, and coolers full of drinks. What started as a rebellious idea was quickly turning into the biggest community gathering we'd ever had. And the best part, it wasn't sanctioned by the HOA. It was sanctioned by us. When Saturday rolled around, my backyard transformed. Dozens of kids splashed in the water, laughter echoing across the fences. Parents lounged in chairs with cold drinks, swapping stories about their latest run-ins with the HOA. Music filled the air, burgers sizzled on the grill, and for the first time in a long time, the neighborhood felt alive. People who barely waved before were suddenly friends, united by the simple joy of defiance. Every splash in that pool felt like a victory, every laugh like a middle finger to the board that thought they could control us. Of course, it didn't take long for the HOA to catch wind of it. Midway through the party, 2 board members showed up, clipboards in hand, their faces twisted into scowls. They tried to push through the crowd, demanding to know who authorized this gathering. I just raised my drink and smiled. You said my pool was a community resource, I told them, so I made it one. The crowd cheered, and for once, the board wasn't the authority. They were the outsiders, surrounded by neighbors who had finally found their voice. They couldn't do a thing. They stormed off, red-faced and defeated, while the party raged on behind them. By the time the sun dipped low and the last guests packed up, my backyard was a little messy, the water cloudy with sunscreen and laughter, but my heart was full. The HOA never followed through on their so-called pool fees after that. They knew better. More importantly, the neighborhood had changed. Walls between us had broken down, and bonds had been built over something as simple as a pool party. What they tried to use as a weapon of control became a symbol of freedom. And as I sat on the edge of the pool, feet dangling in the cool water, I realized that sometimes the best way to fight back isn't with paperwork or arguments. It's with joy, with unity, with a cannonball splash that reminds everyone exactly who this community belongs to. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The pool party had planted a seed. Neighbors who barely spoke before were suddenly stopping by, not just to chat, but to share ideas. We should do a movie night, one family suggested. Another offered to set up a potluck dinner by the pool. The HOA's attempt to isolate us had backfired spectacularly. It brought us together. For once, The neighborhood wasn't just a collection of houses. It was a community, loud, proud, and unafraid. I could feel the shift every time I stepped outside. The air was lighter, the smiles were real, and for the first time, people felt like they belonged. Meanwhile, the HOA went quiet. No more notices, no more compliance letters, no more veiled threats. It was as if they had finally realized that they had pushed too far and exposed their own weakness. The truth was clear now. Their power only worked when we all played along, when we believed their rules were stronger than our unity. But after the pool party, nobody looked at them the same way. Even those who once supported the board began to question why a handful of people thought they could dictate everyone's lives. It wasn't a fight anymore. It was a shift in perspective. And once people saw the truth, there was no going back. By the end of summer, the talk around the block wasn't about rules or fines. It was about elections. A handful of neighbors decided it was time to step up, to run for the board, and actually represent the community instead of policing it. They weren't career busybodies or power-hungry enforcers. They were parents, teachers, workers, people who cared more about cookouts and friendships than lawn heights and mailbox colors. And when the vote finally came, the old guard crumbled. Their reign of fear ended not with shouting or lawsuits, but with ballots, with voices, with the will of a community that had finally had enough. Looking back, I never planned for a single pool party to start all of this. I just wanted to push back, to reclaim a piece of my freedom. But what came out of it was so much bigger. That pool, once just water and concrete, became a symbol of what happens when people refuse to be bullied. Every summer since, we've kept the tradition alive. Families gather, kids dive in, music plays, and laughter fills the air. And every time, I think back to that first party, the one born out of defiance, and I smile. Because it wasn't just about swimming. It was about standing up, about saying no, about reminding ourselves that home should never be a place of fear, but of joy. Now, when I walk past the pool at night, the water shimmering under the porch light, I don't just see my backyard. I see the heart of our neighborhood. I see the moment everything changed. I see proof that unity beats intimidation every single time. The HOA tried to charge me for using my own pool, and instead, they handed me the perfect weapon, community. And in the end, that's what saved us. Not anger, not lawsuits, not endless debates, but togetherness. A splash of rebellion, a wave of laughter, and a reminder that no matter how loud their rules seem, nothing is stronger than neighbors who finally realized that the power was always theirs. What amazed me most was how far the impact of that one decision stretched. Weeks later, I'd still have people coming up to me in the grocery store, thanking me for starting something. At first, I didn't understand what they meant, but then it clicked. The pool party wasn't just about swimming. It gave people permission to live a little freer, to say no without guilt, to laugh without waiting for approval. I started seeing more backyard barbecues pop up, more impromptu kids' games in front yards, more music drifting through the evening air. It was as if the whole neighborhood had remembered what it meant to live, instead of just existing under someone's thumb. The HOA hadn't just lost control of my pool. They had lost control of the community spirit itself. Neighbors who once kept their heads down began to speak up. Some shared how the HOA had fined them for leaving their trash cans out too long. Others told stories about being threatened for having a garden hose visible, or for planting flowers that weren't on the approved list. For years, these stories had been whispered in private, tucked away out of fear. But now, the conversations were open, honest, and loud. The shame was no longer on the homeowners. It was on the board for trying to micromanage people's lives. Each story built another layer of solidarity. And the more we talked, the clearer it became. We weren't just individuals fighting separate battles. We were one community, finally waking up. Of course, the HOA didn't disappear quietly. A month later, they tried one last trick, a strongly worded letter accusing me of unauthorized use of private property for public gatherings. They claimed I had violated safety protocols and liability concerns. But this time, I wasn't alone. Before I could even draft a response, a dozen neighbors showed up at my door, waving their own copies of the letter. Some laughed, others rolled their eyes, but all of them stood with me. "We'll handle this together," one of them said. That's when I knew the board had already lost. Their letters, their threats, their authority, it all crumbled in the face of something they couldn't control: unity. The following summer, we didn't wait for trouble. We planned the pool party months in advance, turning it into an annual event. This time, it wasn't just a gathering, it was a statement. We set up string lights, rented a popcorn machine, even hired a local band. Families brought food from every corner of the neighborhood. Kids decorated the fences with colorful streamers, and laughter carried late into the night. It wasn't rebellion anymore, it was tradition. A tradition born out of resistance, but carried forward in joy. What started as defiance had transformed into celebration, and that shift became our neighborhood's heartbeat. Sometimes I catch myself wondering, what if I had just paid the fee? What if I had signed the check, and let the HOA get away with it? I'll tell you what would have happened. Nothing would have changed. They would have taken more, demanded more, and chipped away at us piece by piece until the neighborhood felt more like a prison yard than a place to live. But standing up, even in a small way, created something none of us expected. We didn't just save one pool, we saved the spirit of our community. And I realized that every act of resistance, no matter how small, carries the chance to spark something bigger, something lasting. So now, when I think back to that first notice stuffed in my mailbox, I don't feel anger anymore. I feel gratitude. Because without it, we might never have found each other. We might never have realized how much stronger we were together than apart. The HOA tried to control me with fear, but instead, they gave me the best gift of all, a neighborhood that finally feels like home. And whenever I hear the splash of kids diving into the pool, or the laughter of neighbors lingering long after sunset, I know the truth. They tried to charge me for using my own pool, but what they really did was pay the price for underestimating us. In the months that followed, the neighborhood truly began to feel different, not in some dramatic, overnight way, but in the little details that added up to something bigger. People waved more often. Kids who once stayed cooped up indoors now roamed from yard to yard, knocking on doors to see who could play. Even the quietest families, the ones who used to nod politely and disappear behind their garage doors, started joining in. And it struck me. What the HOA had failed to understand was that real community can't be manufactured by rules or enforced by fines. It's built in shared moments, in laughter across fences, in helping hands when someone's car won't start. All the paperwork in the world couldn't compete with that. It wasn't long before the HOA board itself began to shrink. One member resigned, claiming personal reasons, though we all knew what that really meant. Another simply stopped showing up to meetings altogether. Without their usual grip of fear, their authority collapsed under its own weight. They were no longer the gatekeepers of our community. They were just neighbors like the rest of us. And the irony was, once they stopped trying to micromanage, people were far kinder to them. Instead of resentment, they were met with indifference. And in some ways, that was a harsher punishment. They had wanted power, but what they got was irrelevance. I can't describe the relief of waking up and realizing there wouldn't be another notice taped to my door, another fine in my mailbox, Another petty threat about the shade of my shutters or the placement of my garbage bin. What replaced that anxiety was something I hadn't felt in years: peace. Real, genuine peace. I found myself enjoying my home in ways I had forgotten were possible. Floating in the pool at dusk, hosting family without worrying about complaints, planting flowers in every color just because I wanted to. And maybe the biggest victory of all was watching everyone else do the same. It wasn't just my freedom that had been restored, it was everyone's. Soon, our block became known as the Friendly Street. Visitors would comment on the laughter, the gatherings, the way people seemed genuinely happy to see each other. And it wasn't forced, it was real. One neighbor set up a book exchange stand in their front yard. Another organized weekend bike rides for the kids. Someone even painted a mural on their garage door, something unthinkable under the old HOA rules. What had once been a tight-lipped, rule-bound cluster of houses had blossomed into something alive. And all of it traced back to one pool party, one act of saying, "Enough." Looking back, I realized the greatest lesson wasn't about the HOA at all. It was about us. People are stronger than they think, but fear has a way of silencing that strength. The moment you stop being afraid, everything changes. The HOA had counted on silence, on obedience, on everyone being too tired or too busy to resist. And for years, they were right. But the pool party cracked that illusion wide open. Once people saw how easy it was to say no, they couldn't unsee it. That realization was more powerful than any rulebook, and it became the foundation of the community we rebuilt together. As the years rolled on, new families moved into the neighborhood. At first, they didn't know the history. They just saw a friendly block where people helped each other and gathered every summer around a pool. But slowly, through stories whispered over cookouts and late-night conversations, they learned. They learned about the HOA that once ruled with an iron fist, about the ridiculous attempt to charge someone for using their own pool, and about the rebellion that turned into a celebration. And every time I told the story, I could see it in their faces, the realization that they were stepping into not just a neighborhood, but a legacy. Even now, that pool means more than water and concrete to me. It's a symbol. A reminder that freedom isn't something handed to you. It's something you claim. Every ripple across the surface feels like an echo of that first splash, that first act of defiance that said, "You don't get to control me." And when I see the kids racing to jump in, their laughter filling the air, I know they'll never understand the weight of that battle. But that's the point. They get to enjoy a childhood free of clipboard patrols and absurd fines, because we chose to stand up when it mattered. Their innocence is the reward we earned. So here's the truth I hold on to. They tried to take something small, something personal, and twist it into control. But instead, they gave us something priceless. They gave us each other. They gave us the chance to remember what it means to live free, to laugh loud, to celebrate without asking permission. And in that way, they failed more completely than I ever could have imagined. My pool is still here. My neighbors are still here. The parties, the laughter, the bonds, they're stronger than ever. And whenever I think about the HOA's plan, I can't help but smile. Because they thought they were charging me for using my pool. But in reality, they paid the price for underestimating a community that was just waiting to rise. And so, when I stand at the edge of that pool today, watching the sun glitter across the surface, I don't just see water, I see a story. A story of defiance, of laughter, of neighbors who refuse to be broken apart by fear. That pool, once just a patch of concrete and chlorine, became something bigger than any of us imagined. It became a gathering place, a rallying cry, a reminder of what we could do when we stood side by side. The HOA tried to twist it into a burden, try to put a price tag on my freedom, but instead, they sparked a fire they could never put out. Every ripple across the surface carries the echoes of that first party. Every splash is a declaration that joy will always win over control. And as I listen to the laughter of kids diving in, as I see the neighbors who once were strangers now calling each other family, I realize the truth. They didn't just fail to take my pool. They gave me back my community. That is the legacy I will carry with me for the rest of my life. Because no board, no fine, no rule will ever stand stronger than a neighborhood that finally remembers what it means to rise together